You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, welcome to Japan Eats. I'm your host Akiko Toyama, food writer and the director of the New York Japanese Culinary Academy, which promotes a deeper understanding of Japanese cuisine in America. We are broadcasting live from Brooklyn, New York. This show is all about Japanese food and food culture. We see sushi every day on the supermarket, but what is beyond sushi? We hear dashi ramen desu kaya, but what exactly are they? Japanese food is still a mystery for many people, and I try to demystify in this program with my good guests. My guest today is Phillip Frankland Lee, who is the chef owner of Sushi by Scratch. And Sushi by Scratch restaurants began in Los Angeles, and New York marks its 10th location, which opened in September 2024. Phillip is known for innovating omakase-style sushi preparations while still respecting the values set by sushi masters. For example, he uses premium seafood mostly from the Toyosu Market in Japan, and he imports rice from Toyoama Prefecture and mills it in-house. On the other hand, he pays homage to his American upbringing by flavoring hamachi, yellowtail with sweet corn pudding, and a sprinkle of sourdough breadcrumbs. Sushi has become a long way in the US since the 1960s when it was introduced to the general public for the first time. And sushi is now one of the most popular foods in the US, and great talents like Phillip seems to be making it uniquely American. So today we'll discuss how Phillip got into sushi, how he studied sushi to build a successful sushi restaurant brand, what is the essence of sushi that Phillip wants to share with his guests, how he comes up with his unique style of sushi, and much, much more. But before we start, Japan Eats is available on Heritage Radio Network website, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify as a podcast. So please go to iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, whichever you listen to, and subscribe to Japan Eats. Please write a video. We really appreciate your feedback. Now, let's start a conversation with Phillip Frankland Lee. Hello, Phillip. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Kiko. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here too. So, first, to get to know you, where are you from, and what did you eat when you grew up?
Yeah, so I was born in Los Angeles in the late 80s. I grew up eating sushi. By 5 years old, that was my favorite food. By 7 years old, I only wanted sushi omakase at the sushi bar. And I was 13 when I bought my first book on how to make sushi and started making sushi at home.
So I'm curious how your parents were eating, like how often?
So, as I'm sure you're aware, but maybe not all listeners at home know this, but Los Angeles was, the port of entry for the Japanese to come over, and so Los Angeles had a sushi culture long before anywhere else in America. And by the early 90s, sushi had become an incredibly prevalent and culturally relevant way of eating, especially where I grew up in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. When I was growing up, sushi was not a $300 or $600 per person experience. That even in Japan, that wasn't the case until not too long ago. But sushi was always viewed as being more of a casual style of dining, and so in the early 90s, sushi was not expensive, and so my parents loved it, and so they exposed it to me at a very young age. And in fact, my father was actually friends with the sushi chef when I was a kid. And so we would, that's how I learned about omakase, is at 7 years old, my father would take me in and sit me down at the sushi bar and say, Phillip, don't tell him what you want. Just tell him what you don't want. And that's how I first learned about omakase.
That's amazing. Yeah, and then you have a wide variety of culinary experiences, not just in sushi, but in New America and Italian, for instance. So how did you get into cooking, and where did you train yourself to become chef?
Yeah, so I was, if you look on my Instagram a while back, I posted a video that my dad found in the old home video archive at the house. And for my third birthday, he had gifted me a chef's knife. Yeah. And you can hear him very clearly say in the video, well, I don't know what else to get him. All he wants to do is cook. Now, I have no recollection of that. And I think my parents forgot about that until my dad found it, a couple of years ago. But yeah, I mean, I've been essentially really infatuated with cuisine my entire life. I'm the oldest of six, and so growing up, with that many kids running around the house and eating a lot of dinners at home, each one of us had sort of like a task when it came to dinner, because dinner was a very, very big part of my family upbringing. We sat down and we ate dinner together every single night, and it was an important part of the day. And since I was the one who could reach the counters, I was helping chop the onions and saute the mushrooms and turn over the steaks. And so I really just I had always been infatuated and involved with food. And at 13, I bought my first book. I lived skateboarding distance away from Ranch 99 Market, which is a Asian market and fish market in Van Nuys, California. And at 13, I bought a book off the shelf there at the market on how to make sushi and maki. And I would go a couple of days a week after school and grab some saku blocks of hamachi, some saku blocks of ahi tuna, some cooked sushi rice, and some seaweed and soy sauce and wasabi packets. And I'd take it home. And at like 13, 14 years old, I would practice making sushi at home.
Mm.
From there, I dropped out of high school when I was 16 because I was playing music in a punk rock band. I told my parents that if the band doesn't work, I was going to enroll in sushi school. But the band did work for a couple of years, and I never enrolled in sushi school. But what did happen is, in between doing tours, I didn't want to work at Starbucks or Jamba Juice anymore. I wanted to get involved in cooking, in like professional cooking. So I got a job as a dishwasher when I was 18 and slowly worked my way up. And by the time I was 19, I started really learning about Michelin-starred restaurants. And by the time I was 20, I was working in Michelin-starred restaurants. And I spent the first maybe 9 years of my career working in as many 1, 2, and 3 Michelin-star restaurants as I could, none of which were Japanese, none of which were sushi, but all of which were very seafood driven, because I was very, very obsessed with seafood. And so, fast forward another decade, I opened my first location of Sushi by Scratch restaurants as an 8-seat tasting menu only, omakase inspired sushi counter. And really, the idea was that I wanted to marry my proficiency in Michelin starred tasting menu with my absolute obsession and passion for sushi.
Mm, like it's interesting. I think you are supposed to cook since you were born. I think born to your family, and it's really coming into really a beautiful picture right now. So, but you are the chef owner of Scratch Restaurants, which operates multiple restaurants and genres, right? So, an Italian, American to Japanese. So, what is the idea of delicious food to you personally? The essence of all things do you want to serve to your guests?
Yeah, I mean, to me, dining out is more than just what it tastes like in your mouth. I think obviously it's like a prerequisite. It's got to taste good. But I really want to show guests an experience, and I want to show them a good time. For me, growing up in these high-end Michelin star restaurants, sometimes although the food is phenomenal, the experience is not so fun. It's sometimes you sit in a fancy restaurant and you're not even sure if you can you know, raise your voice above a whisper to speak to your partner across the table, because you just feel like a little uncomfortable. And so I like to try to have a restaurant where guests feel like they're at home, like they really feel like they're in my kitchen, around my kitchen counter. And that's really what I've tried to accomplish, both in sushi and pasta, and even my burger concept as well. I don't call what we do a Japanese restaurant, because we're not doing Japanese food per se, we're doing sushi. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Same with my pasta restaurant. It's not an Italian restaurant, it's a pasta restaurant. And so, there are a lot of sensibilities of Italian cuisine, sensibilities of Japanese cuisine that I use in those. For example, one of the things that makes Japanese cuisine is the fact that you use the ingredients that are local to you, you know and you use the flavors and the sensibilities of what is local to you. And so growing up in Los Angeles, that's sort of the idea is Obviously, I'm not going to use all the local LA fish because that's not very good. But we're going to bring the best fish in the world, but I'm going to pair it with the flavors and sensibilities of Los Angeles.
Right. Yeah, I really understand what you mean by experiencing something delicious. Because when I saw your counter, it's a sushi, definitely a serious sushi counter, but it's almost like you had a band, and you grew up in a family with 6 siblings, and you have some mindset of creating. Everybody brings together, and then you create the space of enjoy not just your mouth, but the whole thing, the experience and energy. So I understand why what you mean, but how you can manage different genres of food.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah.
mean, I love to cook. I love making burgers. I love making pizza. I love making sushi. I love cooking steaks. That's just, I don't necessarily, to me, there's so many people who just go, I only make sushi or I only make pizzas. And that's totally fine if that's what makes them happy. But I want to do more. But I want to do it not at like the expense of the quality. I don't venture out into different things because don't want to try to master it. I do my best to try to master it, and of course that's an impossible task to ever actually master it. But I think that there's something to when you when you break outside of a certain genre and you start learning different things, you can start seeing how perhaps something that you learn in Italian cuisine can be attributed to perhaps something that is, common in Japanese cuisine. And you just basically, it's like adding more weapons to your arsenal, so to speak.
Mm, right. Okay. And then Sushi by Scratch has 10 locations now, and you got a Michelin star. And it's one of the locations as well, which is amazing. And so, what is the concept of Sushi by Scratch?
So the reason it's called Sushi by Scratch Restaurants, it's actually just called sushi. The restaurant is called Sushi
Mm.
by Scratch Restaurants, just like you might have Sud by Danielle Balut, right? So the name of the restaurant is Sushi. It's just by Scratch Restaurants. And so
Mhm.
Scratch Restaurants is the company that my wife and I started. Margarita, she's my pastry chef and business partner. Her and I started it in 2013, and our first restaurant was called Scratch Bar. And the idea was we did not serve anything we didn't make from scratch ourselves. So if we wanted to serve prosciutto, I'd have to buy a whole pig. If I wanted to serve Parmesan, I'd have to start out with milk, and I'd have to wait a year. And so that really became our approach to cuisine in general, which was I don't want to buy pre-made things from other people and then put them on my plate. I want to buy raw ingredients and I want to actually cook start to finish. And
Mm.
so our company is called Scratch Restaurants. So we're doing sushi by Scratch Restaurants. So, we're making our own soy sauce. We're making our own sushi vinegars. We're making our own yuzu koshos, our own kizami wasabi. We're milling our own brown rice. All the things that you can sort of do to really, really, embody creating something to eat, as opposed to buying someone else's soy sauce, buying someone else's yuzu kosho, buying someone else's ponzu, and then buying prefabricated fish and garnishing it with things that other people made. Right now, that's no problem. It's still good food. It's just not the food that I want to make. And so, for me, the concept really is that uh, I wanted to present a tasting menu. I didn't want to present just a bunch of sushi or a la carte. I'm not really into. I'm not an a la carte kind of guy. I like tasting menus. And for sushi, I don't ever want to order myself. If I'm ever at a sushi restaurant, I want the chef to put in front of me what comes next because you've had a million pieces of tuna, but in what progression, at what temperature, at what seasoning, and I want to see what the chef wants to serve me. You go to a sushi restaurant, you fall in love with a sushi chef because you like the way they approach the cuisine, right? You like what he or she does. And so for me, wanted to put together a tasting menu. I wanted it to be sushi. A lot of, omakase restaurants, in New York City and around the country, you'll go to a place called something sushi omakase, and then you're going to do like an hour and a half in, you haven't had any sushi yet. And then at the end, you get like 4 pieces of sushi and then dessert. And it's like, well, I really wanted to eat sushi tonight. I went to the sushi restaurant. And so for us, I serve strictly nigiri, 16 courses in a row. And that's really sort of the concept of the restaurant.
Mm, right. Although I have to say, you have a pre-dinner time, like half an hour, and you can have that otsumami or the beginning of the course, like a appetizer time, which I think is really interesting and unique
Yeah.
into separate space. So that's another. I thought it was really uniquely American, and I think that's really a beautiful thing to experience two things in one evening. So.
Yeah, and so the idea is it's not, that's the what you just described for those of you at home. What we do is we have seating, so 10 guests at 5, 7:15, and 9:30 every night, but we invite you to come 30 minutes earlier than your scheduled seating for basically a curated pre-gaming experience that's complimentary. So, yeah, I mean, the idea here is, especially in New York City, right? It's the hustle and bustle. It's loud. It's so busy, and you just get off work and you come into the restaurant. And if I didn't have that pre-gaming experience, you come into the restaurant, you walk straight in, and you sit down, and you get a piece of sushi right in front of you, and it's like you need a minute to decompress. So the
Mm,
idea is like we offer it, but we really encourage it because we want you to come in and we want you to take your coat off, sit down on a tufted leather sofa, get a cocktail in your hand, complimentary, have several courses, 3 or 4 canapes, really set the mood, take 20, 30 minutes, and then you go in for dinner.
mm.
And really they are two entirely separate experiences that are designed to flow really well into each other. It's like you can read a book without reading the prologue, but if you read the prologue, it will just get you in the right headspace to consume and indulge what you're about to read a little bit better. I didn't want to just say, okay, you come in, have dinner, and the first half the menu is, cooked food or soups or salads or, I really wanted it to be two separate things because the dinner that you're paying for is sushi. But if you want to come earlier, we're going to give you a couple appetizers, a couple of things just to sort of get you in the mood and ready to start your sushi dinner.
Right. And I have to say, your team is amazing. Like
Thank
very,
you.
kind of like a consistently, like Japanese omotenashi. It's kind of like a common term, but your mind is read ahead of time, and you start feeling warm already. So yeah, it's just a really appreciate your teamwork. It's a great too. So, what do you think is the charm of sushi that you'd like to share with your guests? I know that's probably how you got into sushi at the very young age, right? So, what is the essence of sushi?
Yeah, so sushi, I've been actually studying the history of sushi for almost 20 years now. And it's very interesting because here in America, the tradition and the history of sushi is very, very unknown. And in fact, everyone in America thinks they know, but they have absolutely no idea. And I've been fascinated with the history of sushi. It's quite interesting because the number one feedback we get from Americans is that was great for untraditional sushi. I always sort of, engage in that conversation by saying, what do you mean by traditional? Because what tradition are you talking about? I mean, sushi is 2,000 years old, but it's only been served raw for the last like 250 years. And I mean, only 10% of the history of sushi is raw. And, it's 200 years this year that the first piece of nigiri was ever formed. Right. And so sushi is very, very new. I mean, you mentioned it earlier today that it wasn't until the 1960s that sushi restaurants broke into America. But it wasn't until like the 1950s that sushi went from a cart outside to, actually the first sushi restaurant in Japan. And so the actual in the actual timeline and tradition of sushi, the only thing that has ever stayed consistent is the constant and rapid evolution of what sushi actually is. And
Mm,
so, for me, there's two times in the history of sushi that really inform and really inspire me for what we do at our restaurant. And that is both the Edo period and the early 60s in Tokyo specifically. Because as I'm sure you know, but people at home might not know, the sushi that we know in America today is specifically Tokyo-style sushi. It's not Kyoto-style sushi. It is very specifically Tokyo-style sushi. And so the two times in the history of sushi that truly inspire me, one is the Edo period. Now, I don't claim to have an Edomai-style restaurant, mainly because, to be Edomai, you have to adhere to what was present during the Edo period. So things like toro you can't serve because toro wasn't consumed, in Japan during the Edo period. It wasn't until American occupation when the Americans brought ribeye steaks over that the Japanese started to realize that, the fatty part wasn't, to be thrown away. And so during the Edo period, it was really the first 3/4 of the Edo period, before they were able to sustain ice boxes, sushi wasn't raw. And a lot of people don't realize this, but sushi wasn't raw. It was fermented, it was roasted, it was cured, it was smoked, it was pickled, but it was never raw, mainly because there was no way to preserve it without those methods because there was no refrigeration. And so, like with most peasant cuisines in the old world, many things were served, with sauces, with things to cover up any sort of, funk that the protein might have. And so, you probably remember Akiko, but there's many aspects of my dishes. Now, I do serve raw fish, but I season it and I add little touches of like the flavor of fermentation, the flavor of pickled, the flavor of smoked, the flavor of cured, the flavor of roasted. So I'm touching on all those things that used to be very prevalent during the Edo period when it came to sushi. And the second time in the history of sushi was the late 50s and early 60s in Tokyo. Actually, more so the mid 60s into early 70s. But with really the birth of the sushi-ya boom, where in Tokyo, you'd have these very small little 8-seat restaurants, and back then, there wasn't necessarily a menu where you come in and choose a la carte, but you would go in and you'd sit down and the chef would make you dinner. And each chef, what they would do to sort of differentiate themselves and have themselves stand out from their neighbor is they would tell the story of where they grew up, in the neighborhood they grew up, in the prefecture they grew up, with their flavor profiles, their sensibilities, their approach to sushi in general. So if you went to a sushi-ya from a chef who was born in Okinawa, or a sushi-ya from a chef who was born in Hokkaido, those two chefs would be serving very different styles of nigiri in the sense of their flavors and their ingredients and so on and so forth. And so the inspiration I take from that period is that I thought the most traditional thing I could do would not be to just only use Japanese ingredients and sensibilities, but instead I would treat Los Angeles like the prefecture that I had grown up in. And so I would use the flavors and the ingredients and the sensibilities of Los Angeles when creating my neta.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly. I always think that it's the same as ramen, right? Like the regional flavor, what's available in season is the essence of Japanese cuisine. So if you're in
Correct.
America and making sushi, why do you have to bring everything from like culturally originated from, right? So you are creating your sushi, which is the essence of Japanese cuisine, I think. All right, so we'll take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll dive into Philip's original sushi and the philosophy behind it. So please stay with us.
Today's program is brought to you by Korin, a supplier of Japanese chef knives and restaurant supplies. Korin is proud of their Japanese culture and traditions, but they want you to know that their products are not just for Japanese restaurants. Their knives and tableware bring out the best qualities of food from every culture and fit into every restaurant from French to Pan-Asian to American. And that is why they're located in New York City, where people from every country in the world come to eat. Korin's Tribeca showroom is home to the most extensive collection of Japanese chef knives in the world, including Japan. Stop by to view their exquisitely designed tableware and the rarest natural sharpening stones. They have a whole range of knife services from repair and rust removal to reshaping and realigning. Korin is dedicated to this ideal, bringing the highest quality Japanese design to your table so you can experience the unparalleled quality of Japanese craftsmanship in your home or restaurant. For more information, visit korin.com.
Welcome back. You're listening to Japan Eats on HRN Heritage Radio Network. I'm your host, Akiko Toyoama. My guest today is Phillip Frankland Lee, who is the chef owner of Sushi by Scratch. And Phillip is known for innovative omakase-style sushi preparations while still respecting the values set by sushi masters. So, like you serve regional sushi, which reflects your American background, like we discussed. So, could you give us some examples of your sushi?
Yeah. So, I mean, here's a good example of that. And you actually mentioned earlier, it's a hamachi, that's painted yellow with a sweet corn pudding, and then it's hit with some sourdough breadcrumbs. I steal all my wife's leftover sourdough bread from our sister restaurant Pasta Bar, turn it into breadcrumbs for this course, um, and then I finish it with my homemade soy sauce, and I thicken that soy sauce with the husks of the brown rice that we mill every afternoon into the white rice for sushi, and then a little bit of freshly grated wasabi roots. Now, this might sound kind of crazy. It might sound like, who's this white kid, putting corn and sourdough on hamachi? But when you actually take the bite with your eyes closed, hamachi wants to be sweet. It wants a little bit of texture. Soy sauce with so with your eyes closed, you're like, wow, that's a delicious bite of sushi because it doesn't taste like corn. It doesn't taste like sourdough. It tastes like sushi. And so, growing up in Los Angeles, we have the Mexican style grilled street corn on the cob. And I grew up with Nancy Silverton's La Brea Bakery sourdough was my favorite bread, right? So I'm taking sort of the flavors of my childhood and using them very sparingly to accentuate, the fish. I feel like my job is to sort of be almost like a stylist for the fish. So, I start writing every dish by starting out by just eating, the fish by itself or the protein by itself. And then saying, what does this want? Does this want to be spicy? Does this want to be sour? Does this want texture added to it? Does it want to be sweet? Right. And then I just like how a stylist might dress different body types different ways, different skin tones different ways. I do the same thing with the fish, if that makes sense.
Right. And I think when you read the description, you feel like, what? But then at the end of my bite, it made sense. All of what you made. So, yeah. So, how do you come up with unique sushi flavors and also raise the line of authenticity, not to
Yeah,
cross in your creative mind?
yeah. So to me, it's the most important thing is that we're eating sushi, right? And sushi to me is, I have this ongoing struggle with some of my newer chefs in the company who like they'll come up with a dish and I'll go, that's delicious, but it doesn't taste anything like sushi, right? Just because the fish is on top of rice doesn't quite cut it for us. It needs to taste like sushi. And so my philosophy a little bit is the more common the fish, the less common you're allowed to get with the garnish. The less common the protein, the more common you have to be with the garnish. So, for example, hamachi yellowtail is like probably, behind akami is probably the number one most ordered, sushi in America, right? So, because you're so familiar with it, I want to show it to you in a way that truly honors the fish, that truly honors sushi, but with a flavor and garnish that you maybe haven't had before. Whereas I serve bone marrow nigiri, which has never been served before. And so, because it's so different, I want to serve it to you strictly with soy sauce and wasabi so that I can really serve it to you in the most unadulterated version of the sushi that you may have grown up with, right? So the flavor profiles. And so there's kind of like a spectrum of like the further away you go from the center in one direction, you have to go in the opposite. And so to me, as I build the menu, again, it's a tasting menu. So I don't want to just serve you soy sauce wasabi, soy sauce wasabi, soy sauce wasabi, soy sauce wasabi. Because if you went to per se and you had, 10 courses in a row and they all had beurre blanc, you might get a little bit of palate fatigue. You might get a little bit bored with that. You want to taste and experience different things. And so, as I write my menus, the way I sort of approach it is the first thing I'll do is I'm gonna write a progression of the proteins, right? And I'm gonna write those based on what's very seasonal. So like right now we are in winter, and winter is my favorite time of the year for the Toyosu and Tsukiji markets in Tokyo. And so I'm getting some fantastic things like wild buri, which for those of you at home who might not be familiar with that, that is essentially a mature hamachi, wild caught, much larger, much more mature, stronger. I'm getting fresh sujiko, which is essentially ikura before it's turned into ikura. So it's the raw sack of the king salmon roe, which I'm curing, for about an hour and a half in my homemade soy sauce and unfiltered namasake. And then, ankimo and shirako and things like that. So I'm using a lot of very traditional and very delicacies, very dishes or ingredients that are considered delicacies in Japan. And I'm treating them in ways where when I write my menu, I write a progression of the protein. And then I sit down and I write a progression of the flavors, temperatures, and textures to match which each protein to sort of tell the story, start to finish. So you feel like you're taken on a journey as opposed to just having, a collection of pieces of sushi.
Right. So I think another element that supports your traditional mindset in making sushi is the rice or shari in Japanese. It's very important. It's almost some chefs say it's as important as the neta, the part, the fish part. But you import koshihikari rice from Toyama Prefecture and mill
Mhm.
it in house, which sounds pretty labor intensive and it sounds almost unreal. So, why do you do that? And how do you choose the rice that you like?
Yeah, so I want to make the best sushi in the world. That's my goal. I know I'm never going to accomplish that, but that is my goal, right? And I feel like you are absolutely correct. The sushi rice is often more important than the fish. Because here's the thing: all you have to do is spend money to get high quality fish, but you can't just spend money to have amazing rice, right? The rice is where you're really showing your craft, even more so than the fact that you have deep pocketbooks and buy really expensive fish. So, to me, I view the rice the same way I view the dough or the crust on pizza, right? Everyone's getting, the same mozzarella and they're getting the same San Marzano tomatoes for their sauce, but it's the craft of actually making your pizza dough that really separates. I mean, you're in New York, right? So New York pizza, right? It's about getting that perfect crust. And that's really what sushi rice is. You can't put great fish on bad rice. But you can put okay fish on amazing rice. Now I choose to do amazing fish on amazing rice. And so here's the thing is, I actually never was serving milling my own rice before. Now, my younger brother, Lennon Silvers Lee, he worked with me for about 9.5 years. Started as my dishwasher, worked all the way up to become the head chef at one of our locations in Montecito, California. And the first year we got our Michelin star, my little brother was behind the counter at that restaurant. So it's amazing. I
Mm,
get to actually share a Michelin star with my actual blood brother, and that's pretty incredible. Um,
mm,
so my brother Lennon had some investors approach him a couple of years ago, and he broke off to open his first sushi omakase called Silver's Omakase, which, if anyone listening to this is in Santa Barbara, California, or goes to Santa Barbara, California, go and check out Silver's Omakase. It is unbelievably good. And my brother found this rice. He found this rice, and he got the miller, and he started milling the rice. And he told me about it, and I was kind of like, "That sounds like a ton of work. It sounds like too much for me." And then I came to opening night of his restaurant, and he showed it to me, and I tasted his rice, and I said, God damn it, Lennon. I got to start milling my own rice. You're right. And so, he put me in touch with his contact in Toyama, and I started importing the rice. And, what I've really found is it really truly is the equivalent of like buying coffee beans and grinding them yourself at home every time you make a cup of coffee versus buying the Folgers pre-ground coffee, right? So
Mm.
importing white rice, it's going to sound sacrilege to say this, but I feel like you're importing dead rice now that I have learned about brown rice, because
Mm.
you mill the rice and you smell it and it's so fragrant. You can smell it and then you cook the rice, and when the rice comes out, it smells like popcorn. It smells like it already has butter on it. I can't even explain the flavor profile. And because it's so fresh, um, the rice, the texture is so bouncy and so beautiful. And so, I've fallen in love with it, and I've rolled this out. I started it in New York, and I've rolled it out in Austin. I'm preparing to roll it out over the next month in all of my restaurants because it just really is that good. And like you said, the rice is really the star of the show.
Right. Well, I would imagine like butchering the whole animal versus getting a cut pieces. You raise the flavor of the rice by milling it by yourself. So yeah, it must be exciting, and you really commit to the flavor of the rice to make it shine.
And that's what
On
we
the
do. I mean, we bring in the whole side of the bluefin tuna. We bring in, I'm not doing it in New York at the moment. Because I don't have the room for it, but I'm going to work on it. Like in Austin, Texas, I have a large dry ager, right? So I'm bringing in a lot of the fish, and it's hanging for between 4 and 9 days before I break it down and putting just the right amount. Something I learned, I've been aging my akami for years. For probably about 7 years now, I've been aging my akami, but I was never aging my toro. And this last winter, I spent a month and a half in Japan with my family, and I was invited by the Wagyu Mafia and Toyosu Sushi to do a pop-up and take over one of their sushi bars in Minato, Tokyo. And when I did it, we went to the market. I gave my list of what fish I wanted to have. And because I was doing only 7 seats, only 4 seatings, they weren't going to bring in a whole tuna for me. So they had this beautiful number one uh, bluefin toro. And the chef said to me, I'd have this for you. I've been aging it for 2 weeks. And I thought to myself, oh, I don't want it. I don't want aged toro. I want fresh toro. And the second I put my knife into that big block of toro, and I'm talking, this was the whole toro, skin on. I mean, this is basically akami removed, but large. The second I put my knife into that toro, I could just feel the oil content. And I went, this is going to be amazing. And I take a bite of it. And now that's what I'm doing. And it is, wow. I mean, it's and that's the thing is like you think you're good at something until until you go and you have an open mind and an open heart to always be learning and always be adapting and trying new things. I mean, in the last 8, I mean, I feel like I only figured out I think I told this to you when you were dining with us a couple months ago. You're like, I said, I think I just figured out my rice. But to be honest, last night I looked at one of my chefs in Austin. I said, I think we figured out the rice.
Mm.
Like every day we're trying to get better.
Right. So it's the forever student. That's the sushi chef saying,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Right. So you've been familiar with sushi from a very young age and have observed how sushi become popular in this country. So how do you describe the change in American perception of sushi over time from your childhood to this moment? Do you think that we can say sushi is now part of American diet?
I wouldn't even just stop there at saying that it's part of American dining. I think sushi has become one of the most important cuisines in America. I mean, sushi is something that's celebrated the whole world over. I mean, modern day sushi, when we think of sushi today, especially as Americans, we think of nigiri, right? And nigiri is 100% a Japanese, creation, like that is like for me that's like the signature, specifically of Tokyo. But what sushi has become in America is quite profound. I mean, and it's the history of it and the way it's unraveled is quite sensational. I think because it went from being this very exotic, weird thing that these Japanese people are making. What's that black paper that they're putting on stuff? Ew, raw fish, right? Because America in the 50s was not eating raw fish. And so, people today, they look at some of the maki, and they don't realize that the seaweed is on the inside because they were trying to hide it from the Americans because Americans were weirded out by eating seaweed, right? Um, and so we've gone all the way from the Americans going, ew, this is weird and gross. And it had to be a very, very inexpensive product because nobody wanted it, all the way to now, it's the most expensive cuisine in America by far, like by far. I mean, to go have a even non-Michelin star, sushi omakase in Manhattan, you're looking at $500 just to walk through the front door, and you're looking at like $900 if you want to do it right, you know. And there's no steakhouse that's that price. There's no Italian restaurant that you're paying that kind of money. And so it's been very interesting to watch because one of the reasons that New York City is so much more expensive in their sushi than Los Angeles is that Los Angeles inherited sushi in the early 60s as sort of a peasant cuisine, just sort of a street food, very, very casual, very low brow. It was really the movie The Breakfast Club that I've read has taken the really responsibility for blowing up the cuisine. And after that, all of a sudden, the people in New York are going, "What's this stuff the movie stars are eating out there in LA?" And so the story goes that some very wealthy investors from Wall Street flew to LA and stole a few of the higher end sushi chefs, brought them back to Wall Street, and marketed them as the most high end exotic food to the stars. And that's why in New York, sushi culture is super expensive and high end because it never started, or it didn't start as commodity cuisine. It started as this really high end exotic cuisine on a pedestal. And so
Mm.
now as we continue from the 80s into the 90s, into the 2000s, into the 2010s, when I first opened my first location in 2000, I think it was late 16, early 17, there really was only one omakase only, sushi place in Los Angeles, and that was Urasawa. Urasawa was a disciple and protege of Masa before Masa moved from Los Angeles to New York. He inspired me a lot and taught me a lot of what I'm talking about today. And you know, uh, but 8 years ago, 9 years ago, there was a shitload of sushi in LA, and you could do omakase if you wanted to, but there was not a lot of omakase only restaurants. And so when we started doing this about 8.5 years ago, and we started this sort of, when I first opened, it's funny, I was getting torn apart in the media. It was right during the time that like people were getting canceled for cultural appropriation, and it's like, who's this white kid trying to make sushi? You're not allowed to do that. You're not Japanese. I got sort of torn apart because people were saying, you can't have omakase only. You can't have it be a speakeasy. You can't garnish your fish. It's supposed to be just fish on rice. This is blasphemy. But I just, kept my head down and kept doing what I felt was very integral because I felt like the people who were attacking me just had no idea what they were talking about. And as I continued, and with the rise of Instagram, now, it seems like this speakeasy, 10-seat omakase only with the chef's flair is really become the most prevalent style of sushi. I mean, nowadays, when a new sushi restaurant opens, it no longer is normal for the sushi restaurant to just be a regular a la carte with tuna on top of rice. Now, if you want to compete, you're essentially following, the model that we created about 8.5 years ago, which, by the way, is not a model I created. It's a model that the Japanese created in the 1960s. It's just a model that never really made it to Los Angeles until we started sort of, taking that over.
Right. Well, it made sense, right? We discussed earlier, you are creating a Japanese sushi in the region called America. So it really a natural progression that you're doing is what you're doing. It just makes sense to me. Um, yeah. So I have another. It's kind of a separate angle of what you're doing, but I heard You aim to create a new model of the hospitality business with a great compensation package for your employees, including health insurance, 401k, and so forth. So, could you tell us about your model of the business you're trying to realize that's one day?
I started as a dishwasher. I was a line cook. My last executive chef job before I opened my first restaurant, I had a salary of $32,000 a year. My wife was a pastry cook, pastry chef, and she shared a similar salary. And growing up in the restaurant business, it's kind of like a rite of passage. It's kind of like cool to be broke. um, it was like it's just part of the gig is like if you want to be a chef, you're not going to make money. That was just and we embraced that. At least those of us who really wanted to make something of our career, we embraced the fact that we were broke. But as you get a little bit older, and as I started to open restaurants and I was now responsible, I wanted to break that cycle. It's almost like you hear about like maybe you were spanked by your parents, so you don't want to spank your kids. You want to treat them better than you were treated. And so for me, and my wife Margarita, the idea is we really respect what our teams do. We really respect the job of a chef, the job of a pastry chef, the job of a sushi chef. And we think it's about time that we're no longer looked at as the help, right? But we should be professionals. We should be professionals, and this should be a business that is revered. And it is revered these days by the general public, but it's revered in a way where you still don't make any money. And so, for us, we're not interested in providing jobs. We're interested in providing careers. And if you're looking for a career, we're going to hold you to the standard of a professional, and we want you to be compensated like a professional. So we compensate our staff probably, if I had to guess, more than double what the industry standard is. And that's before the fact we offer 401ks to everybody, including dishwashers, with a 5% match, which is the legal limit. We offer full benefits. We offer continued education stipend. We offer, if you're a chef and either you or your spouse is giving birth, you're going to get 6 weeks of full pay. That is
Mm,
unheard of in our industry. But I don't know why. Well, actually, I do know why, because most restaurants are owned by businessmen, not by chefs. And when you're a businessman, you got to make your numbers, you got to make your margins, you're doing it to make profits. And when you're a chef who owns, you're doing it to create a culture, and you're doing it to share your passion and your vision. Now, of course, as a business owner, I want to make money. I need to make money, but I don't need to make any more than I need to make. And what's most important to me is that my teams make money. My wife and I have been awarded a Michelin star now 4 years in a row, and when we get called on stage, we get called on stage for 2 restaurants, not just one in California. And our goal is to get more. And the first time I found out we were getting 2 stars, I cried, and it was an amazing feeling. But I think the most proud I've ever been as a chef is when one of my chefs who started with me in culinary school, he's now at year 11 with us. And about 2 years ago, he came to me and said, "Chef, I just got approved to buy my own house." And as a chef in this company, he bought a house in California. And that was probably the proudest moment I've ever had, because this kid gave us a decade of his life, and he has a family, and he now is able to own a home. And and now we have several people who have worked for us for long enough that they've been able to save up and actually buy a home. And that's not something that's normal in being a cook in this
mm,
industry. That's not
right.
normal. And that's what I want to make normal. It should be normal. We as chefs work harder than any other, well, I don't want to say than any other industry, but we work harder than most other people in most other industries. We do longer hours, we do harsher conditions, we care more, and we never, ever, ever give up. And why shouldn't we be compensated? And I think the
Mm,
major difference is anything that I don't give to my team goes to me. right? Because if you give someone a raise, it has to come out of the profit. And so, I've always had this philosophy. I won't buy a Mercedes until my staff is driving BMWs. I won't buy a Porsche until my staff is driving Mercedes. I won't buy a Ferrari until my staff is driving Porsches, right? No, I'm nowhere near there. But you see what I'm saying? Like I'm not, I'll buy my first jet when my staff own their own helicopters, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. I think everybody feels that way, and we have to increase this energy of what's right, what's wrong, right? Because you can't live without dining out like we suffered during COVID, and really learned something was wrong and something has to change. So, yeah, and so what are your plans and dreams? We just heard one of your dreams, but what else?
So, I've been saying for a long time that my goal was to have 100 world-class restaurants by the time I'm 50. I currently have 23 restaurants total. 2 of them have Michelin stars. And I still would like to accomplish that, although my goals and I have a daughter now, and my goals have changed slightly. I don't want to just be a workaholic for the rest of my life. I do want to be a great dad. That has been my new calling. But also to be a great dad, I also have to enjoy myself. I have to be happy to show my kid how to be happy. And so, I would say, well, here's a very relevant goal. My wife and I and our daughter, we spent a month and a half in Japan this last winter. I've always wanted to live in Japan. And about a week and a half in, I'm thinking to myself, how do I broach this topic with my wife? And she comes to me at dinner and she goes, I think we should move to Japan. And I went, oh my God, yes, please. And so we have this idea and this goal that we want to move to Tokyo, and I want to open a 4-seat omakase only. My version, 4 seats, 1 seating a day. And I want to be the first American chef to move to Tokyo and get a Michelin star making sushi in Tokyo. That's really, that's my goal. And we talk about it a lot, and we've looked at places, and it's something that in the next year or two, we really, really want to explore. Our daughter is 2 right now. And so we figure either we've got to do this before she's 6 or after she's 18. And after she's 18 years from now, I don't know how much energy I'll have to go and really try to do that. But also, if I want to be the first guy to do it 18 years from now, chances are someone else will have done it, if that, you know what I mean?
Right.
So that's really my goal, is because, it's interesting, and it makes me feel so happy. And I actually get emotional about it sometimes, is like, it's really the people who make me feel the most welcome in doing what I do are Japanese people, my Japanese guests. And when I was in Japan and I made my sushi, and it's because the Japanese don't look down on, celebrating things from other cultures. That's somehow become an American thing, to hate celebrating other cultures in a really weird way that I don't understand. But that's not. I mean, the Japanese make the best whiskey in the world, right? That's started from a different culture. They make the best. Like so many things that the Japanese do are things that they borrowed from other cultures and then they absolutely mastered. And so, to me, I feel like the best way you can honor something is by being a part of it. That's really our goal, is to one day move to Tokyo and get a Michelin star making sushi.
Right. Well, keep me posted. I think you're going to make it happen. So, yeah. So, where can we find your updates online and on social media?
Yeah, so you can find me it's at Phillip Frankland Lee, my name, all spelled out. If you go there, you can, it links to all of my different restaurants, at Sushi by Scratch Restaurants, at Pasta Bar LA, at Pasta Bar Austin, at Wolf and Wheat, at NADC Burger. Yeah, I mean, you can, the best place to really find me, though, come to one of my restaurants.
Yeah, and that's a big reward waiting. Yeah, it's amazing sushi. So, yeah, well, really good luck. And thanks so much for joining us today, Philip.
It really feels awesome to not just have a conversation with you about it, but, to feel, welcome to have that conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, listeners, if you have any questions or comments about the show or suggestions for short topics or guests, please contact us at japaneats@heritageradionetwork.org or kikokatayama.com. Japan Eats is a weekly program and is always available at heritageradionetwork.org, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify as a podcast. We'll take a winter break for the rest of December, so we look forward to introducing new guests in the new year. So happy holidays to you, everyone. And from our amazing engineer, Gabriel J. Thank you for listening.